立法會主席。
The President. This Council continues with the second reading debate on the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill. Mr. Chen Siu-hong. President, the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill and the Road Traffic Trust legislation enhancing personalized point-to-point transport services amendment bill 2023 that we considered earlier share the same objective of dealing with bad sheep in the taxi driver industry, and is to enhance the image of the taxi industry as a whole, and I support the bill. Now, we're seeing increasingly poor quality of taxi drivers. They overcharged passengers, and then they try to deceive visitors. And then on social media platforms, there are often incidents posted where taxi drivers overcharged passengers. For example, a trip from Central to Causeway Bay cost $200. So they are being counterproductive in our drive to tell good stories of Hong Kong. This is not what we want to see. That's why this bill is necessary and is urgent that we do something to deal with such malpractices of taxi drivers. Now, between 2014 and 2019 each year, there are over 10,000 complaints about taxi drivers. The figures never come down. In the past 3 years, because of COVID, patronage dropped, but still there were some 5,000 to 8,000 complaints each year compared to compared to 2021 and 2022. Out of the 8,000 complaints, most of the cases were about malpractices of taxi drivers, their poor driving behavior, not taking the most direct route, and also overcharging. Overcharging has seen a 21% increase in terms of complaint, and this is one of the offences to be tackled by this bill. Now, for the there's also increasing trend of other malpractices. Now, for example, the offense of not taking the most direct and practical route, there are over 2,000 such complaints each year. And now there are 24 related taxi driver offenses. The penalties being increased, but then these are because these are serious offences. That's why the government is introducing the offence points system. This will serve a stronger deterrent effect and improve the quality of service. I understand some have complained that the offence point is actually double penalty because in Cap 374, that is Road Traffic Ordinance, and its regulations, there are already the 24 taxi driver related offences covered, including the 11 offences covered in this bill. Now, I believe this offence point is to target drivers that repeatedly conduct malpractices. So that's why the more serious 11 offences are included in offence points. This is to crack down on this handful of black sheep, and it will also serve a strong deterrent effect to others. For the majority of law-abiding taxi drivers, they will not be affected by the offence point system. So there is no question of double penalties. I hope after the bill is passed, the administration will step up publicity and in particular send information to the taxi trade so taxi drivers know what is the difference between the original offences and this defence point system. This will address their concerns. Now, when taxi drivers commit the related offences, they will be covered. And for example, for the more serious offences such as overcharging, tampering with the taximeter, that will be 10 offence points, or not taking the most direct route or soliciting, that there will be less points, and so on. So if there are 8 offence points accrued in 2 years, but under 15 points, then there will be an advice sent to the taxi drivers to serve a deterrent effect. For taxi drivers with 10 points or more, there will be chance for them to improve. They will have to take the taxi course completion taxi service improvement calls, and then 3 offense points will be cancelled from their record. And for taxi drivers who have 15 offense points or not, they will be or more, they will be disqualified from driving taxi for a certain period. Now, the offense point system contains both the carrot and the stick. This is a way to punish taxi drivers that commit malpractices. On the other hand, is to encourage taxi drivers to improve their driving behavior and conduct. Now, whether the taxi service improvement calls will really improve the conduct and behavior of taxi drivers, or I have some reservation, but still taxi drivers are given a chance to make amends before they are given heavier punishment. So we'll see whether it works. Now, on law enforcement, there's something of great concern to many. During the deliberations of the bill, many members expressed concern about law enforcement. How do we collect evidence? How do we produce evidence or produce proof and so on? Now, there could be challenges. Now, we don't want taxi drivers to be wrongly accused or passengers not to have their complaints dealt with properly. So the taxi drivers are concerned that they will be caught by the law inadvertently. Now, of course, there are defense provisions in the bill. Taxi drivers will not accrue offense points just because there's a complaint from passenger. The police will do investigation, and the court will have to meet a conviction for offense points to be deducted. But then it may be the case of one's words against the others, so it will not be possible for the law enforcement agencies to collect evidence, conduct proper investigation. So that's why many members have proposed that the administration make use of technology to do with that. For example, in Macau, it's mandatory now for cloud-based camera to be installed in all taxis. The data will be sent to a cloud storage, and then when there are disputes between drivers and passengers, then law enforcement agencies could access the central cloud storage to collect evidence. And then this way, passengers need not be concerned about privacy. Now, since 2019, Macau rolled out the new new legal system for taxi services, and then they also make it mandatory to install cloud-based camera. It's been very effective in targeting the black sheep in the industry. Now, between 2017 and 2019, there were some 3,000 to 6,000 cases of malpractices involving taxi drivers. And then in 2020, after the installation of a cloud-based camera for 3 years in a row, the number dropped to just about 100 cases a year. So it's you can see this arrangement is really effective. Yes, after the resumption of normal travel, cases went up to 400 odd cases again in October 2023, but still is sharp drop from the number in earlier years. So that's why I think the administration must explore the feasibility of mandatory installation of cloud-based camera. Now, administration says that there may be complex issues. For example, operators may have to pay monthly service and maintenance fees, and that means there will be additional expenses incurred on a regular basis. But I think the administration should explore this possibility with the feasibility with the trade and actively promote the installation of such cameras. And with economy of scale, prices will probably come down. So perhaps the government could first set up a central platform for drivers who to join voluntarily, and when more drivers join the platform, then at an appropriate time, the government may consider making it mandatory for the installation of the cloud-based camera. And also we've suggested that with the taxi fleet regime, we could start a pilot scheme with fleet taxis for the installation of the cloud-based camera, and then other taxis may follow suit later. Now, for the TDOP bill and the earlier bill that we consider about personalized point-to-point service, both bills are to improve the quality of taxi service and also to target black sheep in the industry. This is in response to the aspirations of the public and also for passengers, drivers. There will be better road safety. So I speak in support of the bill.
Mr. Frankie Yik, President. Well, as the saying goes, there is always a black sheep in your family. Of the 40,000 plus taxi drivers in the industry, there must be black sheep among them. Time and again, the police mount operations to go after unscrupulous drivers. But since it is not costly to engage in such misbehavior, many taxi drivers continue to engage in different forms of malpractices. It only targets 4 major offenses: overcharging, alteration of taxi meters, taking detours. The government took 7 years to come up with a proposal covering 18 offenses. Now, after seeking feedback from the industry, the list has come down to just 11 items. Still, there are wide repercussions among the industry. Now, after incurring 15 points, many the taxi drivers will be suspended from driving a taxi, and this has sparked a wave of taxi drivers withdrawing from the trade. Of course, whether or not the points will be incurred will depend on the police enforcement action and the ruling of the court. For the law-abiding majority, they should not be affected. But then it's double penalty for taxi drivers who are subject to both the Taxi-Driver-Offence Point system and the system under Cap 374. For ordinary drivers, they are not subject to the TDOP system. Many taxi drivers would therefore turn to other forms of public transport, not to mention turning to white licensed vehicle drivers. It is understandable that there is a backlash in relation to the TDOP system. The taxi industry has been attacked by the white licensed vehicles, and the white licensed vehicles have eaten into their business. But instead of putting them under control, the government now chooses to regulate the taxi industry. Not to mention another harsh measure for aged taxi drivers above the age of 65 to be subject to more frequent physical checks. Some older drivers will be phased out, and this will in turn cause a more severe shortage of taxi drivers. Now, the law-abiding taxi drivers would like to single out the black sheep of the taxi industry as well for overcharging and altering taxi meters. These are serious offenses for which heavy penalties should be imposed. The offenders should be subject to suspension of the license for life for deterrence. Now, according to experience, courts usually meted out fines of up to several $1,000s. It is not deterrent enough. The courts never hand out a maximum sentence. But it is also peculiar that the prosecution never asked the courts to pass harsher penalties. That means, in fact, we can just review the sentence for serious cases to step up deterrence instead of amending the legislation. The government should reconsider introducing the TDOP system only after these measures have been taken. There is a lack of clarity, and taxi drivers are concerned that there could be abuse of the system. If the TDOP system is to be introduced, GPS and taxi monitoring system in the compartment should be installed so as to safeguard the interests of taxi drivers so that they will be protected against unreasonable complaints from passengers. Only by doing so can we allay the concerns of taxi drivers. On the issue of privacy, the CCTV cameras can be adjusted to point away from the passenger. I received a reply from the Privacy Commissioner Taxi services, after all, is are public transport services, albeit they're personalized. There should be clear guidelines such as installation and management of the system, suitable reminders for the data users, subjects concerned. As long as all these safeguards are put in place, there should not be any privacy breach. So I urge the government to mandate the installation of CCTV cameras and GPS in taxi compartments when introducing the TDOP system. These devices should be subject to centralized management. Like Mr. Chan Sil-hong said, in Macau, the government has arranged for the device to be introduced. The central cloud-based camera system allows the government to have access to data in a centralized approach. Now, in Macau, they have salvaged public confidence in taxi services. I think we should learn from Macau and install standardized camera systems in taxi compartments to address the issue of quality. And the government should be responsible for managing this central cloud-based system to address the issue of data leak. Taxi drivers can make reference to certificate of traffic conviction records of individual drivers in deciding whether to rent out the taxi to the relevant driver. Now, during the scrutiny of the bill, some members suggested setting up a blacklist for unscrupulous taxi drivers so that the unscrupulous drivers will be deterred from abusing the system. I so submit I am opposed to the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill. Dr. So Xiaoming. Thank you, President. There is a common refrain that taxi services in Hong Kong are appalling. Many passengers in Hong Kong have the experience of witnessing the unscrupulous behavior of taxi drivers, such as taking a detour, overcharging, altering taxi meters, and many taxi drivers are very rude to their passengers. Between 2018 and 2022, among the complaints received by the TAC, complaints against taxi drivers remained a major category. Between 2018 and 2019, over 10,000 complaints relating to taxis were received per year. During COVID, this figure came down, but with resumption to normalcy, as COVID epidemic subsides, in 2022, close to 7,600 complaints have been received. That's about 50% of all complaints against public transport services. Between 2018 and 2022, on average, every year, we recorded 258 convictions on taxi driver-related offenses. So this leaves much more to be desired when it comes to improving the quality of taxi services. This is also the public's aspiration. I support the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill on this basis. Through introducing the Taxi-Driver-Offence Point system, we can step up deterrence against abusive taxi drivers to improve the quality of taxi services. It will send a clear message to the taxi industry. The government is minded to step up regulation of the industry to lift the image of the industry as a whole. This is a good deed. According to the bill, for overcharging, refusing to drive to a destination other than the most direct practicable route, altering, damaging a taximeter, so on and so forth. These are serious offences. 10 points will be incurred. And for taking detours, soliciting, etc., 5 points will be incurred. not setting taximeter to recording position, etc., 3 points will be incurred. Now, if a taxi driver has incurred 10 points or more within a 2-year period, the Commissioner for Transport may direct the taxi driver to undergo and complete a taxi service improvement course within a certain period of time. Now, if 15 points have been incurred, then the taxi driver may be disqualified from driving a taxi for a period of time. The TDOP system is a system that provides for the withdrawal of the taxi driver from the industry. It has deterrence. For the law-abiding majority, they will not be affected. It's not detrimental to their business. One pain point in the government's regulation over the taxi industry is that 18,000 taxi licenses are floating in the market, and they are on a permanent basis and they can be traded freely. There are also 9,000 major license owners. They dominate the market, and the government is therefore unable to impose additional license conditions on them. There is no ground to take back the licenses from them. With the emergence and prevalence of online car or ride-hailing platforms like Uber, there is also a problem of quality. Taxi drivers would cherry-pick passengers. The government is not putting a stop to the white license vehicles. Whilst introducing a TDOP system through the bill, there is also now a heavier penalty for the white license vehicle drivers. There are suggestions that the TDOP system will drive new taxi drivers away, and it would be detrimental to attracting new blood to the taxi industry. I should think otherwise. I think allowing only those with a suitable caliber to stay in the industry is a responsible way of improving the taxi industry. The government should publicize the system more extensively so that passengers are well aware of the responsibilities and obligations. In particular, in terms of collection of evidence to prove offenses such as driving other than taking the most direct practicable route and overcharging. I think this is a meaningful bill. In the long run, in order to improve the ecosystem of the industry, we need to phase out white license vehicles so that we can put a stop to this unhealthy competition. At the same time, the government should also increase the supply of other forms of public transport. The government should introduce other competitors. Technology should be deployed, devices should be installed to enhance efficiency. There should be more channels for public transport users to give feedback so that through the multifaceted approach, the government can achieve the objective of improving the quality of taxi services whilst catering for the development of the industry. I so submit.
Mr. Chao Xiu-chong, President. I have reservation about the taxi driver offense point systems. Taxi drivers who commit malpractices should, of course, be penalized. No one would object that. I agree that recently in the taxi trade there have been black sheep. To these black sheep, well, for them we have to penalize them. For CAP 375A and CAP 375D, there are in total 24 taxi driver-related offences covered. For 5 of them, the maximum penalty is level 6 fine and 6 months of imprisonment term, and the taxi drivers committing these offences could be disqualified from driving taxis. So I don't see the urge of imposing another offense point system to impose double penalty. If we think that there is a lack of deterrent effects of the existing legislation, we should step up enforcement actions and educate the public. For instance, there should be more undercover operations. There should be more communications and education with the taxi drivers. We do not necessarily have to have a new offense point system. We see that taxi drivers are getting old. Young drivers are not willing to join the trade. Currently, the income of taxi drivers are lower than the average of transport industry. In 2021, the income of taxi drivers is about 18,000 per month. In 2022, it's about 22,000. So it's not very attractive for taxi drivers to join the trade. If we imposed a new point system, it would aggravate the situation, and we won't be able to attract new blood. With white licensed vehicles and competition of other types of vehicles, and with a increasing cost of fuel, taxi drivers are facing huge pressure. Even if the taxi fares is increased, the rent is also increased at the same time. So the taxi drivers aren't earning much. In the long run, if we do not tackle the issue about taxi drivers not earning enough, we won't be able to enhance the taxi service quality. Recently, there have been voices from the taxi trade that if taxi drivers can establish employer-employee relationship with the owners, it could help address the problem. Taxi drivers, if they get a regular income, they will be less likely to commit malpractices and improve their service quality. I don't see the government being motivated to promote this in the trade. The new point system is not an effective way to tackle the issue. Thank you. Ms. Doreen Kong. Taxi service quality is of high concern of the public. Over the years, the government haven't had the determination of addressing the issues. We lack new blood in the trade because of online ride-hailing platforms as well as COVID pandemic. It affects the livelihood of taxi drivers. There have been overcharging in the trade. Taxi drivers lack the support. Most of the taxis lack the GPS system as well as e-payment system. Taxi drivers are getting old and they have been suffering over the 3-year period of pandemic. They have gone through 3 years of tough times. However, the government did not tackle the issue with ride-hailing platforms. Instead, the government rolls out the new offense point system. I have for a number of times pointed out that the current CAP 375A as well as CAP 375D, that is the Road Traffic Public Service Vehicles Regulations, there are 24 taxi driver-related offences, including overcharging, etc. There are already penalties. The highest penalty is a level 3 fine of $10,000. 18 of the offences covered, the maximum penalty is 6 months of jail term. For the 4 most serious offences, including overcharging, damaging the tampering with the taximeter, etc., there are already existing penalties. We failed to combat the black sheep not because of a lack of legislation, it's because we lack the determination to enforce the law. in Canton Road, in Tsim Sha Tsui, and in Admiralty, there are many taxi drivers that commit malpractices. I am most concerned about taxi drivers making detours. For the 24 offences covered in the legislations now, the government is imposing more serious penalty for 4 of the offences. Within 2 years, if the taxi driver make detours 3 times, they will incur 15 points, they will be disqualified, and they will be suspended their license for at most 3 months. The government did not explain how to collect evidence to prove that the taxi driver makes detours, and how to address the issues of one word against the others. We have to adopt a targeted approach. For overcharging or making detours, I believe most law-abiding taxis would agree that we have to combat the black sheep. However, for offenses like making detours, it causes concerns of drivers. If they incur 15 points, they will be disqualified. For taxi drivers who have to take care of their family, what kind of protection can we offer them? Should they ask the passengers every time which route they would like to take? In the Bills Committee, I have pointed out a number of times that making tours should be exempted from the point system. However, the government did not take on board my suggestions. I want the government to tell me which country or city in the world would penalize taxi drivers like this with double penalty. I have tried to do research, but I don't see any countries in the world that would impose double penalty like this on taxi drivers. Is it because we have the worst taxi drivers in Hong Kong, or is it because the government has not been enforcing the law? The CE has been saying that we have to tell good stories of Hong Kong. We have already 24 offences covered in the existing legislation. With another offence point system, it would tarnish the image of Hong Kong. For law-abiding taxi drivers, as well as for the tourism industry that is currently recovering, it would bring about negative impact. What matters is how we enforce the law. The new offence point system is duplicating existing punishments. For taxi drivers who try to make ends meet, this looks like a new offence points system. However, how come the government is not regulating the online ride-hailing platforms? Instead, it's imposing extra pressure on taxi drivers by imposing this offence points bill. With the above remarks, I do not support this bill. Thank you. I so submit.
Mr. Tony Xie. Thank you, President. Now, for taxi services in Hong Kong, there is a problem with the system, and there is a handful of black sheep, trying to target the deceive their passengers. Now, we passed another bill yesterday. That is the Road Traffic Legislation Enhancing Personalised Point-to-Point Transport Services Amendment Bill 2023. The government wants to introduce a taxi fleet regime to enhance the competitiveness and quality of the trade. And now we are debating this taxi driver offence points bill, is to introduce an offence point system so that we could crack down harder on taxis with malpractices. This is to enhance the image of the taxi trade as a whole. Now, there are offences such as overcharging, refusing a hire, not taking the most direct route, or tampering with taxi meter, and so on. These are the so-called scheduled offences. If taxi drivers have committed these offences, then depending on the degree of gravity, the Commissioner of Transport may record 3 offence points, 5 offence points, or even 10 offence points. In 2 years, if the taxi drivers accrued more than 15 offence points, the Commissioner will apply to the magistrate to disqualify the taxi driver from for 3 to 6 months. Of course, the taxi driver could also take the taxi service improvement course for some of the offence points to be cancelled. It's similar to the traffic regulation for general motorists. Now, the taxi drivers believe they are already punished by the law if they committed scheduled offences, and if the case is serious, the court may order a disqualification directly. Why is it that on top of the existing penalty system, there is a need for an additional offence point system so taxi drivers suffer double penalties? So these are the questions asked by taxi drivers. Well, one reason is because we do have serious problem with malpractices by taxi drivers. And then when courts mete out punishment, they'll just look at the actual case, and the impression we get is that often the penalty is too light. Very often it's just a fine. Rarely will there be imprisonment. And of course, even more rarely, taxi drivers will be disqualified. Now, there may, for some of the black sheep, they will just consider the fine as part of their operating cost, so they will continue to break the law. And so for the other good and law-abiding taxi drivers, their image is tarnished as well. So it deals a blow to the industry as a whole. But if we look at it from a different angle, if the taxi drivers are law-abiding, they need not worry about the offence point system or the disqualification penalty. That's why I support the principle of this bill. But then many taxi drivers pointed out that for some of the scheduled offences, such as refusing a hire or not taking the most direct and practical route, or not delivering the hire to the designated destination, well, there may be grey areas. They worried that the offence point system may lead to more disputes between drivers and passengers. Taxi drivers may be wrongly accused, and they may be disqualified even. So the law enforcement agencies must conduct in-depth investigation. There must be sufficient evidence before there is prosecution. So it's not the case that taxi drivers will be prosecuted just because there is a complaint. As for the Commissioner of Transport, it's only after there's a conviction before the Commissioner will deduct offence point, will record offence points. In the process, the taxi driver involved have avenue to lodge an appeal, and then there's need to apply to the magistrate for disqualification. So there are therefore safeguards in the system. But to avoid undue complaints or disputes, I think the government should issue guidelines with examples to the taxi trade. There must be public education and publicity before the system comes into place. So we can explain to the public what's meant by refusing a hire or not taking the most direct route. And then passengers may also make unreasonable demands. For example, they ask to be dropped off in restricted areas. And how should taxi drivers deal with that? I hope the government will consider issuing guidelines on that. And then the government could also refer to the practices in other places, make good use of technology. They should mandate the installation of cloud-based camera, so as to protect the interests of both drivers and passengers. So for drivers, passengers, taxi owners, or even insurance companies, they will all have peace of mind. Now, with the new taxi fleet regime, there will be an online booking platform, so passengers may pre-book trips, and then there could be also other value-added services on top of just charging the fare based on the taxi meters. Now, there are non-fleet taxis who wonder if the government is trying to phase them out because they are not taken proper care of. For non-fleet taxis, they have asked for the government to set up a common online hailing platform for all non-fleet taxis. The government should also crack down on the illegal online ride-hailing platforms. This will allow non-fleet taxis to compete with fleet taxis. Now, whether it's the most appropriate to set up a government online hailing platform, well, we could debate that further. But now the secretary said yesterday he would look into that. Now, I don't think government should just ignore the various online ride-hailing platforms now available in the market. There should be at least some form of certification by the government so visitors can tell whether these platforms are legal and then they are not actually white licensed car hailing platform or platforms for taxis with malpractices. Now, say at the cruise terminal, we have seen long queue of cruise passengers waiting for taxis. So if, people rebook a trip, maybe the government will allow non-fleet taxis to also charge a surcharge for picking up such fares. Now, the government shouldn't just resort to an offence point system to punish taxi drivers. There have to be more appropriate incentives for the trade to improve its quality of service and also to attract more people to join the trade. Thank you. I speak in support of the second reading and the third reading of the bill. Thank you. Mr. Chen Pui Lam. Thank you, President. The public have been demanding for improvement to taxi services and also to increase the penalties for malpractices of the taxi trade. So the government is now proposing a taxi driver offence point system. I agree there's need to increase the penalty for malpractices and also to introduce an offence point system. But then some are of the view that the offence point system will not bring about improvement to the taxi trade services. Now, some say that with some of the offences, it may be difficult to collect evidence and produce proof, so there could be disputes. And with the offence point system, first the law enforcement agencies will have to conduct investigation, collect evidence, and before the court will rule on the case before offence points are recorded. And then from the time of committing an offence to to go through investigation and then for the court to rule on offence points, that will take some time, and these taxi drivers will be able to continue driving a taxi. And then only taxi drivers who have 15 offence points will be disqualified for a certain period from driving a taxi. That means this black sheep will remain in the taxi trade for some time. And so the handful of black sheep will continue to tarnish the image of the taxi trade, and that's why some have questioned the effectiveness of the offence point system. Now, at the Bills Committee meetings, we asked whether the records of offence points will be open to taxi owners so they could see which are black sheep. But then the administration's response is that based on privacy consideration, the offence point system will only be open to the taxi drivers themselves, and maybe taxi owners could ask for taxi drivers to produce proof of no conviction. So if that's the case, it will be hard for taxi owners or employers to check on the driving records of taxi drivers. That's why I hope the administration will consider my suggestion again. Now, for the data kept by the Transport Department and the police, there should be a central database including also the information such as the age, the driving experience of taxi drivers, accidents they were involved in, and any penalty and offense points and so on. So when taxi owners rent their vehicles to taxi drivers, they could make reference to this database. And then insurance companies could also do a more accurate risk assessment in deciding on the premium level. Now, for taxi contractors and other stakeholders, they will have be able to identify taxi drivers with poor records. And only if there is such a system in place that we're able to improve the quality of taxi services and enhance the image of the trade as a whole. There are different stakeholders, including taxi trade, who support the installation of dash cams and cameras. This will protect both the interests of drivers and passengers. For the relevant recordings, they should be automatically transmitted to a cloud-based storage and managed by the government. Only authorized persons will have access to such recordings. If there's an accident or if there is a dispute, then there will be evidence. That's why I support mandatory installation of cameras in taxis. This will enhance the safety and service standards of taxis in the near term. It will also reduce the number of traffic accidents. And then the data could also be submitted to the could also be open to insurance companies for determining the premium level. I don't think the government should resort to various excuses and refuse to take up this suggestion. So I speak.
Mr. Yum Kong, President, when it comes to the development of the taxi industry and the conduct of taxi drivers, they are essential to supporting the tourism development in Hong Kong as well as upholding our image as an international metropolis. As the tourism industry returns to a path of recovery, we are receiving more tourists. In the first 10 months of in this year, we received 26.7 million tourists, and it is growing at a pace of 8%. There is naturally a surge in demand for taxi services. There is a need to step up regulation of the taxi industry and combat the malpractices in the taxi industry. There is black sheep in the taxi trade committing offenses such as overcharging, taking detours. There is a need to amend the law to step up regulation. We should introduce a point system to meter out heavier penalties. But we need to take a carrot and stick approach. Apart from introducing a TDOP system for taxi drivers, we should commend good taxi drivers. We should commend those abiding by the law. For example, for those who install e-payment system to keep pace with the times, the taxi owners should be commended. For taxi drivers who undertake improvement courses, they should be commended as well. For taxi drivers who are honest, who on their own initiative return the lost property to the passengers, they should be commended. And these commendations can come in the form of giving merit points, so that the demerit point system and the merit point system can go hand in hand, so that we can set good standards for taxi drivers. This will help boost our image as an international city. For areas frequented by tourists, such as the BCPs, designated points should be set up for taxi drivers. This can help alleviate traffic burden in these areas during rush hours. The government should be lenient in terms of parking and the stopping of taxis in these places. And this can also facilitate tourists in using taxi services. I support the bill. I so submit. Reverend Canon Peter Kuhn. Taxi services in Hong Kong have been deteriorating in quality. This is a known fact. Poor attitude, overcharging, taking detours. These are common problems. According to the Transport Department statistics, in the first 9 months of this year, for complaints relating to taxis, there are 400 cases per month. That's 20% of all the traffic accidents in Hong Kong. From 2018 to 2022, there are about 4,000 taxi traffic accidents on average per year. There is a need to clean up the taxi industry and improve the image. Now, as the government emphasizes the importance of telling good stories of Hong Kong so as to attract international investors and tourists to come, we need to consider the fact that the taxi industry is going in the other direction. They are tarnishing our image as an international city. For tourists, as soon as they arrive, they usually use taxi as the first point of transport, and on social media platforms we see an influx of complaints from tourists in relation to taxis. They complained about the taxi drivers' attitudes, and they're refusing the hire, using excuses like that's the end of the shift, and they also overcharge by imposing surcharges, and some of them even alter taxi meters. On this basis, I support the introduction of a TDOP system through the bill so that passengers' interests can be safeguarded and the taxi service quality can be maintained. I think the bill represents a starting point of an overhaul to the industry. In order to revamp the ecosystem, we need to take follow-up action. The government issues taxi licenses, and the taxi fares are subject to approval by the CN Council. Comparing to other forms of public transport, the taxi industry does not have as much support or regulation. According to the practitioners in the trade, they complained about insufficient fares, and this eats into the income of taxi drivers. New blood are deterred from joining the industry. This is a vicious circle. The government should consider different levels of fares for taxis. For example, late at night, the surcharge can be imposed. For longer trips, additional charge applies, and so forth. We can deploy innovative means to change the fare structure and attract new blood to the industry. Take Macau and the mainland as an example. In recent, years ago, the taxi industries there also suffered different problems, such as torn and tattered taxis, poor service quality, etc. After introducing a fleet regime, the government's concerned also introduced e-payment system and a taxi monitoring system. Since then, the taxi services have greatly improved. Passengers are willing to pay more to take a taxi, and this helps lift the image of the city. To many, taxi is not just a form of public transport. It is also our city's image. With the passage of the bill today, I hope that the taxi industry will undergo improvement in the long term to meet public aspirations. The government should come up with measures to support the taxi industry. so that we can give the industry a stronger role to play for our tourists and locals.
Mr. Adrian Ho. Thank you, President. I give my support to the Taxi Driver Offence Points Bill. Taxi service quality is under criticism by the public. There is overcharging, poor attitude, etc. by taxi drivers. These are all not news. There are lots of information and videos showing these malpractices online. Under this point system, taxi drivers who incur 15 points within 2 years will be disqualified from driving a taxi. This will help improve taxi service quality. Apart from introducing the point system, I think the government should more proactively enforce the law. There have been undercover operations conducted by the police to combat offenses like not wearing belts on public light buses, etc. If there are malpractices by taxi drivers, the police or the government should prosecute the offenders. For drivers who incur more than 12 points, they have to complete a course. I think for those who incur 8 points, they will have to, or they should complete the course. I understand that most taxi drivers think this will put pressure on them. However, there are legislations regulating behaviors of private car drivers as well. This is undoubtedly a kind of pressure put on drivers. However, we should protect the safety of passengers. A responsible taxi driver would not commit any of the offenses listed or incur any points. This point system only targets drivers who commit malpractices. Thank you. Mr. Tan Yueheng. Thank you, President. In recent years, the local taxi trade is faced with problems. There's been a drop of businesses and there's been a lack of new blood, and we see poor service quality. Passengers opt for other types of vehicles or public transport. Some of them go for Uber or other ride-hailing platforms. We see malpractices of taxi drivers, and those tarnish the image of the entire trade. That undermines the interest of the public, and that also damages the reputation of Hong Kong. I support the Taxi Driver Offence Points Bill to increase the penalty and deterrent effect. We should stringently combat any malpractices. I hope that through the establishment of this system, we can bring about a new scenario in the trade so that we can ensure good development of the trade in the long run. In introducing this new point system, as well as the fleet regime, the government should then step up the efforts in the following. First, there should be strengthened enforcement actions. The government is heading towards the right direction by introducing this point system. The point is to step up collecting evidence and investigation so that we can make this point system effective. Currently, the pain point is that it's been hard for the government to collect evidence. The government should explore installing cameras in taxis, and the footage should be uploaded to the cloud system for storage. Afterwards, the enforcement agency should examine the footage and collect evidence for the complaints received. The enforcement agency should also simplify the procedures of collecting evidence or investigating into different cases so that the cases can actually be followed up. Also, the government should brief taxi drivers on the new system. There should be clear interpretation and definitions of the offenses listed under the point system. There should be explanation to the trade to alleviate the concerns of taxi drivers so that taxi drivers won't be caught by the law inadvertently. There should also be publicity on the new point system, and the government should monitor the behavior of taxi drivers and consider inconspicuous positions in taxi compartments, put up notices, or also on the receipts issued by the taxi drivers, there should be information including the license number of the taxi drivers or channels through which the public can make complaints. These are all keys to whether the point system can be effective. Also, the government should tackle the issues with ride-hailing platforms or services to ensure healthy competition. The government should not allow ride-hailing platforms to run businesses at low cost. Together with the trade, the government should come up with regulatory framework, and so that the ride-hailing platforms can run legally. For instance, there can be a registration system, and the government can issue licenses to registered platforms. The government should ensure labor protection. Also, there should be platforms for conventional taxis so that conventional taxis can compete in a healthy manner with online ride-hailing platforms. And this will ensure an improvement in point-to-point services. I so submit. Thank you.
Mr. Michael Look, President. Well, this bill, Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill, is actually an extension of the bill we considered yesterday, that is the Road Traffic Legislation Enhancing Personalized Point-to-Point Transport Services Amendment Bill 2023. That's why both bills are covered by the same Bills Committee. I'm a member of the Bills Committee. First, on behalf of the FTU and relevant associations, taxi associations, I am all in support of the government cracking down hard of taxis with malpractices. I support the police in taking out strict enforcement. And then yesterday, in the bill, there's increase in penalty on 4 types of offences in particular. That is refusing a hire, tampering with the taximeter, overcharging, and not taking the most direct route. Now, first conviction, there's a maximum fine of $10,000 and imprisonment of 6 months. A subsequent conviction, a fine of $25,000 and imprisonment of 12 months. So that's what the bill yesterday was about. Now, actually, the trade doesn't want to tolerate the black sheep because they will tarnish the image of the trade and Hong Kong as a whole. And it's also make it inconvenient for commuters, so that's why we have to get rid of all these black sheep. So in the taxi trade, we will only have law-abiding taxi drivers providing a good service. This is something everyone in this council will support, of course. So the question is, what is the best way to achieve that? Yesterday, I abstained from voting on the point-to-point transport services bill. You know the reason why I abstained from voting, because we're not able to introduce an employment contract system for taxi drivers, because my amendments were voted down. So it is a great pity that we're not able to take the advantage of the taxi fleet regime in providing the management of taxi drivers. But then in terms of increasing the penalty, we're all for that. So we want this message to come out clearly. Now, for the defense point system, is it a good way to achieve the objective I just mentioned? Well, we've listened to the views of the public, the trade, and so on. And there's also been much discussion on our own. And we believe this is not the best approach. Why? Because disqualifications would be a strong deterrent. Well, there are actually 5 types of offences that will lead to disqualification after court conviction. That is overcharging, refusing a hire, or neglecting, or to follow the directions of hirer to reach a certain destination, and not taking the most direct practicable route. That means making detours, or refusing or neglecting to carry the number of passengers required by the hirer. That means the taxi could take 5 persons, but the taxi driver won't allow that, something like that. So all these offences could lead to disqualification. So that means these penalties are already in the existing legislation, but then the courts probably tend to be too lenient. Well, in 2019, why did we see those incidents? Because before that, the court sentence was too light, and so people were not scared. It's the same with fraud cases. Very often, the court sentence is too light. And then another issue is about law enforcement. Well, in the past, the police have been too relaxed with enforcement actions. I'm not saying that they're not doing enough in terms of frequency of law enforcement action and so on. You know, I'm always in support of the police. But then there are still black spots for taxis with malpractices. For example, at Lang Kwai Fo, we all know we would never get a taxi just by paying the meter fare. It's on Xiaohongshu and on many other platforms, and then but then the police would not do decoy operations there. If they do so every day, I'm sure they're going to catch many of the black sheep. So it's because the police are not doing enough in law enforcement. That's why these black sheep are not scared. So if you have this defense point system rather than that, I think you should just step up enforcement action. And yesterday already we've increased the penalty, and I'm sure that will be enough to deter the black sheep. And of course, we're seeing changes in the market. One of the bureau has considered new ways in using technology. Why is it that it seems Hong Kong is lagging behind? If you compare ourselves to the mainland, we see that there's rapid progress on the mainland, but we can't compare ourselves to some Singapore and Macau even. Now, you know, in Macau, they of course the taxis are black in colors, and they have many bad drivers. They were notorious. But now there's been much improvement. Why? Because they have now installed GPS navigation system and cameras, so the black sheep cannot do any bad anymore. So can Hong Kong not follow the practice of Macau? The government could give subsidy to the trade to install GPS navigation systems and cameras. Then it will be easy to deal with complaints. You know, in a year there may be several thousand complaint cases, or even over 10,000 cases, but only just 500 or so successful prosecutions. Very often it's because there is not enough evidence. So it's the case of my words against yours. So why don't you subsidize the trade to set up the cameras and the GPS navigation system, because then you can't argue if you're not taking the most direct route. So that's why I think the government must crack down hard on all the black sheep in the taxi trade. But you have to be careful with the approach you take, though, and we have to consider which is the best approach. Now, this defense point system, recording 10 offense points, there are so-called side effects. Now, some say you can't say you don't support the bill or you abstain from voting on the bill. But there are certain cases that we can consider. Say, take the example of not taking the most direct route. Sometimes drivers may not share the same views as passengers. For example, I will often take a taxi from Tuen Mun to Tin Shui Wai, my home, and then I could take the Tuen Mun Highway or the Castle Peak Road. Taking the Tuen Mun Highway will be quicker, but then it's a longer route. But then if I go go via Castle Peak Road, there are more traffic lights, but then it's a shorter route. So if the taxi driver chooses to take the Tuen Mun Highway, doesn't mean that he's not taking the most direct route. Sometimes he just wants to reach the destination quicker, and he's not communicated properly with the passenger, and then he could have offense points. And for other taxis picking up different passengers, they will also be given offense points, but they're just trying to help passengers share the cost of a ride. And for passengers, they may like it, but then because something happens and then the passenger is not happy, and a complaint is made, and then the driver will get 5 offense points again. Now, in some cases, of course, the taxi drivers deserve the offense points, but then there are other cases where it's just misunderstanding, and taxi drivers will still get offense points. Now they are already struggling to work in the trade, so it would just add to their pressure. With the defense points system, well, first of all, our position is that we are all for stepping up penalty and enforcement against the black sheep, but then is the defense point the best systems. As a second point, third point is that we want the government to make good use of technology so that we could have high quality development in cracking down on malpractices of taxi drivers. And at the end, then we'll be able to improve taxi services and improve our image, and it will make it easier for commuters too. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung. President, I first want to talk about scores. Now, I go for full points, 100 points, or I'll go for just 0 points. Now, in some APIs, the government says that when we go to school, it's not about the score. I think this applies to this bill. When taxi drivers drive a taxi, they're not going after offense points, but rather they're going after better quality of service. So that means taxi drivers have to make sure they have 0 offense points, but they must also score 100 points in terms of service quality. So Hong Kong, I think most people in Hong Kong are well educated. They should know their rules, their laws, and in different places there are different codes to observe as well. But then people sometimes may break the rules just out of expediency, and they think they may get lucky, but then or they may even break the law, but still this is breaking the law. Now with General Motors, there is this offense point system that came to place in 1984, and if motorists commit any offense, they may have to pay a fixed penalty. There may also be offense points, and when the points accrue to a certain level, the motorist may be disqualified from driving for a certain period. Taxi drivers are, of course, among the general drivers, and now taxi drivers, there are specific taxi driver related offenses as well. So I think it's necessary we have this bill to to protect the safety of passengers. The whole purpose is to improve taxi service quality, and then there are 24 taxi-related offences. The government is just picking the 11 most serious offences to be included in the offence point system, and it targets only taxi drivers where there are no new offences involved. But then taxi drivers may think that the offence points system is actually double penalty to taxi drivers, and it would deal a blow to their morale. Of course, the government wants more effective measures to target the black sheep in the taxi trade. They want to improve the image of the taxi trade and the service quality as a whole. So for the majority of the law-abiding taxi drivers, they are not affected. But at the same time, I hope the government would appreciate this. This offence point system will certainly cause some concerns to taxi drivers. So the government needs to do more in terms of publicity and education. Most importantly, we need to let taxi drivers see the importance of abiding by the law and also of driving safely. Now, there will be for the 4 most serious offences, that is tampering or defacing, damaging, or altering a taximeter. Second one, overcharging, and there are 2 other offences in relation to refusing hire. Now, for the first conviction, the maximum fine and imprisonment term is the current level, that is a level 3 fine of $10,000 or imprisonment term of 6 months. But if there is a subsequent conviction, then the fine will be level 4, $25,000 or imprisonment of 12 months maximum. So this is a 2-tier penalty system, and I support this arrangement. But then what is most important is that courts will mete out sentences that serve the intended effect. And even if it's a subsequent conviction, how do we make sure that the penalty is enough? Otherwise, it won't be deterrent enough. And then all these bills will mean nothing. It's a waste of the time and effort of this council and the government. So that's why the government needs to inform the court about the guidelines. Now, what is the crux of the issue? Is that for taxi drivers and taxi owners, it's about their relationship. Now, taxi owners need only rent out their vehicles and get rental income. As for the conduct of taxi drivers, that's nothing to do with the taxi owners. Taxi owners have no obligations in regulating the conduct of taxi drivers. Because on the part of taxi owners, it's about renting out their vehicles to get an income. As for taxi drivers, they only care about whether they can pick up passengers and make money. And if they could pick up passengers, they could pay for their calls, and then they earn an income in return. That's their purpose. So for both taxi owners and taxi drivers, it's all about making money. They won't do anything extra. I think the biggest problem is there's a handful of taxi drivers who choose to break the law in increasing their income. On the quality of taxi services and also on public perception about taxi services, well, this will do a big damage. Now, when I spoke on the other bill earlier, I mentioned that several issues. First, the licensing system. The government needs to consider that. Secondly, the development of professional taxi drivers. The government have to consider a labor policy for taxi drivers, where we can make use of smart devices and train a new generation of taxi drivers. Thirdly, ride-hailing platforms. There's already direction for any advanced cities to go. So the government needs to come up with a new set of legislation and rules. So for Hong Kong residents and visitors, their needs will then be met. And fourthly, we need to have convenient transport services. We need to provide services of good value, and we must also allow the public to make use of different modes of transport. Now, we must not miss out on the opportunity because it's a pressing issue. The government needs to come up with solutions to these to the main real problems. There are 4 problems. First, the quality of service. Secondly, ease of using taxis. Thirdly, income protection for taxi drivers. And fourthly, types of taxi models. So I speak. Thank you.
Mr. Ben Chan. Thank you, President. For taxis, they should be regulated. Now, because taxi service quality is coming under fire, if it continues to be the case, it would be a matter of survival for the industry as a whole. And there is a spiraling out of control. That means with more and more complaints surfacing, the industry will have little room for survival. Now, with a regulatory regime put in place, there is hope for the industry to improve its services and a chance of survival. This is the background of the taxi driver offence point system. For recidivists, for the black sheep in the trade, we should go after these unscrupulous taxi drivers. Taking this targeted approach, we can weed out black sheep from the trade. Now, I'd like to speak on these 2 points. First, for the black sheep of the trade, I don't think the majority of taxi drivers would like for them to be let off lightly. I don't think anyone here would agree that we should condone the black sheep, and that is why the government should step up its efforts to go after the black sheep. According to media reports, in the first quarter of 2023, 9,798 complaints were received, 8,680 of them related to public transport services, 2,476 related to taxis. Comparing to the first quarter of 2022, that is a 1.4 times increase. 1,059 cases related to taxi drivers' performance. Apparently, there are criticisms as to the conduct of taxi drivers. Many aggrieved passengers have decided to lodge complaints against them, hence a surge in complaint figures. So for the repeated offenders, they should be on the alert. Now, under the TDOP system, for the most serious offences, a taxi driver will incur 10 points, similar to the DOP system. And once you've incurred a sufficient number of points, you need to undergo and complete a mandatory driving improvement course for points to be deducted. Now, the number one question is whether the points system is deterrent enough. If this is nothing but talk shop without sufficient or law enforcement action of sufficient strength, the effort would be futile. And I'm happy to learn from the Secretary yesterday that they would be deploying technology to help with law enforcement. So one of the important points is law enforcement. We need to install a taxi log. As I often tell government officials, it is pointless just to have decoy operations. You don't have sufficient manpower to handle all these cases. That is why we need a monitoring system installed in taxi compartments round the clock. Now, for this logging device, it should have 3 functions. First, GPS. Because one of the offenses relate to taking detours. Second function is video recording function, so that you can capture what happens at the scene. third function, audio recording function. Even if the image of the person is not captured, you can at least capture what he says. And then the data should be uploaded to a central platform. Only designated people can have access to the system. Only when we have these devices would the interests of passengers be safeguarded. Of course, this comes to a cost. Comes with a cost. Perhaps after passing the bill, we can start discussing how we should apportion the costs to different parties. The taxi industry is struggling at the moment. I think some form of subsidy should be provided. It is only reasonable. There are so many streets, so many cars plying the street, and with the devices installed, I think it's only reasonable that some kind of support should be given for them to manage the devices. I don't think there would be wide repercussions if support could be provided. There is a request for all taxis to be installed with the system. Now, the administration may be worried about the possible backlash from the industry. But if we agree that this is only for the good of the industry, that it is for the common good, then I think the taxi industry will support it as well. I hope that the relevant issues can be discussed as soon as possible here, so that the relevant regulations can be made, perhaps early next year. Now, for drivers having points incurred, what happens after that? It is pointless if there is no consequence. Now, if a driver then joins a taxi fleet, and if the government sets up a database, then the relevant parties concerned can have access to this database to find out if the taxi driver has incurred points, if the taxi driver has been suspended from driving a taxi. That is why a database should be set up, and also taxi owners or taxi rental companies should have access to the database, because if the taxi is rented out to the driver and then a traffic accident occurs, there is implication on insurance premium. The database should allow access by other parties. But more importantly, I think that an incentive mechanism should be set up for taxi drivers with good performance. We should commend them. Some passengers would like to praise these taxi drivers. There should be a channel for them to show appreciation. We should not only set up a complaint channel, we should set up a channel to commend the good drivers. Perhaps every year we can hold a ceremony to give out certificates, even awards, even gifts such as an iPhone and Huawei phones. That means we need to have carrot as well as a stick to be fair. According to some taxi associations, taxi drivers will be having a lot of stress because of the locking device and the camera systems. But then if you're upright, you shouldn't be worried about that. The devices can protect passengers as well as taxi drivers. They can help taxi drivers ward off unreasonable complaints. If there is no evidence, there is no way the court will believe you. So the evidence will help protect both parties. Likewise, this system will protect both parties. I hope that the government will join hands with the taxi industry to improve the quality of services, to create a bigger pie and give passengers a better experience. The DAB supports this bill. Mr. Lee Chun-kang. Thank you, President. The Liberal Party, as always, support a stringent effort in going after the unscrupulous taxi drivers and unlicensed licensed vehicles. These unscrupulous taxi drivers always frequent popular tourist attractions such as the peak tram stop and so on and so forth. Apparently, these taxi drivers will only take passengers if they agree to pay extra instead of paying by the meter. And it is really unfathomable why the government is not going after them. I've come across some very good taxi drivers. According to statistics for the unscrupulous taxi drivers, they account for some 0.3 to 0.4% of all taxi drivers in the trade. Is it necessary to enact legislation and introduce a regime to regulate all taxi drivers? The answer is in the affirmative. Under the Road Traffic Ordinance, there are 24 taxi driver-related offences that come with penalties to regulate taxi drivers. The penalties range from fines to imprisonment terms. We are discussing the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points system. That means apart from the penalties I mentioned, there is also a point system for taxi drivers. Imagine a new driver. Would he prefer to be a taxi driver or a driver for other businesses such as logistics or other public transport? Of course, I would prefer not to be a taxi driver because of the DOP system as well as the new taxi driver offence point system. There is a widespread concern in the taxi industry that many taxi drivers will stop renting taxis. This will also exacerbate the problem of the lack of younger taxi drivers. Younger drivers will turn to white license car services instead. As we return to normalcy, we need to do something to ensure that we provide quality taxi services to tourists so that they arrive at the destinations safe and sound. We should deploy technology to step up law enforcement action. Instead of metering out harsh punishments on law-abiding drivers and putting more stress on them. Now, as mentioned just now, we need three things. They're all related to technology. There should be a logging device with a GPS. There should be a dashboard cam, and there should be an audio recording device. Now, why do we need an audio recorder? Deputy President, the point is nowadays anyone can lodge a complaint without ground. There is no cost to that. Now, the taxi driver may have uttered something like, of course, and then the passenger who may find him to be rude, and then when a complaint is lodged, this taxi driver will be deprived of the means of living. So if there's an audio recorder, we can do justice to both passengers and the drivers. President, we should rake our brains and consider how we can help improve the image of the industry. First of all, we need to make sure that they can earn a living. We need to go after the bad drivers, the black sheep. That is, of course, true. That means if we set up a central database with a blacklist, the good taxi drivers can also apply with the police for the issuance of a certificate of traffic conviction record. This can serve as a reference for taxi owners to decide whether to employ the taxi driver concerned. What happens at this moment is that we have the taxis, but not the taxi drivers. So we should rethink whether on top of the existing legislation we should introduce the TPO-BP system. Otherwise, we'll be short of taxi drivers on a permanent basis. In fact, the crux of the matter is, over a decade, we have had this problem of white license car service. The government, however, is not taking rigorous action against them. Just use any online car hailing app, or if you just take a look at the advertisements on TV, you will find lots of them. These are illegal operations. I question why they are allowed to give commercials on TV. I say the government do two things. First, those who drive a white license car should be severely punished. In doing so, we should urge the court to give out heavier fines or even terms of imprisonment to punish these drivers, instead of just meting out a fine of $2,000 to $3,000. These are the black sheep of the trade. These are the bad drivers. Now, if the court's fines are too light, they are absorbed as part of the operating costs. If we're able to revamp the penalty system, we don't need to introduce a TDOP system, because the system is shunned by the taxi drivers. Sooner or later, they will drop out and decide not to drive a taxi. This is the prevailing psyche among taxi drivers now. I hope members can mull it over. Should we give taxi drivers the carrot or the stick? Shouldn't we help them improve their performance? Or should we just whip them and scare them away? I myself and the Liberal Party will be opposed to the bill.
Mr. Stephen Ho. Thank you, Deputy President. I want to stress that I'm going to refer to just a handful of black sheep in my speech. We've talked a lot about social welfare. There's been lately a movie called Under the Daylight. And the government reacted in response, saying that they have rolled out measures. In 1993, there was a movie about taxi drivers. The main protagonist, his wife passed away because of a taxi driver's malpractice. So the taxi driver, that is the male protagonist, made revenges. We are now in 2023, and we see a new point system. Well, Mr. Ben Chen said that it's better to have regulation than not. I'm not opposing to his views. I'm just saying that back then, in 1993, we had relevant discussions about malpractices of taxi driver. Some say that bad taxi drivers is part of the culture of Hong Kong. And we are experiencing cultural shock now, and many people are complaining about our taxi drivers' behaviors on social media platforms like Xiaohongshu. This affects the economy of our city. This also affects the livelihood of taxi drivers. And because of all these, we are now having a discussion about this point system. Another thing is we are seeing the emergence of online ride-hailing platforms, and this is making it harder for conventional taxi drivers to make a living. So what is the government's attitude towards it? The government remains silent about this. Be it the conventional taxis or the online ride-hailing services, they are both heading towards a bad direction. For the offenses covered under the point system, taxi drivers who commit these offenses can be put to jail immediately. Mr. Michael Luke said that there are many bad drivers in Lan Kwai Fong, and if there are enough undercover operations, a lot of drivers will be arrested. For white licensed vehicles, just impounding 9 of these vehicles is just the tip of the iceberg. During an undercover operation, once the driver offering ride-hailing services, once they get the payment, you can arrest them. Well, there is a need in the market for ride-hailing services. And there is monopoly in the market. Some taxi drivers with malpractices said to me that they are unwilling to do so. It's because some other drivers are snatching their businesses. That's why they are forced to commit malpractices too. Now we're seeing huge problems. The government has to do something. The government is rolling out this solution of point system. Is this an effective means? I don't think so. Some members said we cannot rely on the police officers to enforce the law. The secretary mentioned yesterday that the government will make use of technology. The technologies mentioned existed 20 years ago. Dashcam is not a new technology. Mr. Ben Chen said we have to protect both parties. I don't think this point system is offering protection to either of the party. Instead, it's offering protection to the government. It allows the government to pass the buck by just putting all the cases to the court. The government should do something after the reform of the electoral system. There's no excuse for the government now after the improved electoral system. I have to stress again that I'm referring to just a handful of black sheep in the trade. And you are now forcing the majority law-abiding drivers to commit malpractices. I want to say a few words about licenses issued to fishermen. There was the African swine flu in the mainland. The government said that it had to impose stringent licensing conditions to the trade. Foreigners are asked to pay cash when they take taxis in Hong Kong. To improve service quality, do you have to add extra licensing condition? You have to, for this particular problem, roll out e-payment system instead of imposing licensing conditions. Secretary, please think about this seriously. We have to take different approaches to solve the problems we're facing. First, we are seeing the emergence of online ride-hailing services. How are you going to mitigate the impacts on conventional taxi drivers? How are you going to regain public's confidence in taxi service? As a passenger, I don't want passengers to cherry pick or make detours. I don't want to worry about that as a passenger. If you cannot solve this problem, the offense point system will not serve huge purpose. If you do not tackle these issues, you will have to spend even more time on addressing the problems. I took a taxi the other day. I told the taxi driver that I wanted to go to Yuen Long, and then a staff gave me a ticket showing that the fare would be $230. If the fare exceeds $230, that means the taxi driver is overcharging. There was a staff at the taxi stand to issue a ticket to prevent the taxi drivers from overcharging, and you are deploying extra manpower just to prevent malpractices of the black sheep. Why is that? It's because you don't trust the taxi drivers. I have to stress that I'm just referring to a handful of black sheep here, and to go after or to prevent malpractices of just a handful of black sheep, you are deploying so much resources. You have to tackle the problem at root. You haven't been making great effort in inspection. Well, Mr. Ben Chen was very mild in his speech just now. He's been acting as the middle person between the government and the trade. Of course, Mr. Frankie Yik also did similar work. And they gave their support to this bill as much as they were unwilling to. Secretary, you have to think about how to deal with the issues arising from ride-hailing services online. You have to show that you're determined to tackle the issue. Well, some members said that they object to the bill, but I believe this bill will be passed. Here in this council, you're not just aiming to have the bill passed. After the improved electoral system with consensus, we have been passing a lot of bills. There may be just a few opposing votes. Even just with a few opposing votes, you have to reflect on your policy. I am speaking as a passenger. If the problems are not improved, I believe passengers will suffer if they get on a taxi driven by a black sheep. Dr. Simon Lee. Thank you, Deputy President. I take taxis quite often. I have come across quite a number of good taxi drivers. Regrettably, if we ask the general public in Hong Kong, probably none of them have not suffered from bad taxi drivers' behavior. And probably all of us have been refused by taxi drivers. Members have talked about taxi service quality, taxi drivers' attitude, and so on. I support the enactment of this legislation from the criminology's perspective. What matters is not whether we have the law in place, it is whether we can enforce the law. This is like a basic theory in criminology. The bill may be passed today, but it doesn't mean that we can solve the problem at root. What matters is whether the government can enforce the law. We can think about why there are so many issues with the trade. Some taxi drivers refuse to cross the harbor, and it has to do with the taxi drivers changing shifts. And that's why taxi drivers display poor attitude. And in the end, it will affect their income. During typhoon, taxi drivers may increase fares. What are the reasons behind? It has to do with insurance premium. Then we can think about why there are so few people willing to join the trade. It has to do with the income level. I've conducted studies, and I compare how Hong Kong fares with 15 other comparable cities in the world in terms of the level of bus fares. For the first 3 kilometers in Hong Kong, it's about 3 to 3.2 times. And for other comparable cities, the fare discrepancies between bus fares and taxi fares is about 5-fold. So, the taxi fares that taxi drivers are charging are not enough for them to make ends meet. If we are to raise taxi fares, we have to think about inflation rate and the affordability and acceptability of the public. So we can think about whether we should impose a 2-tier system for taxi fare adjustment. For some taxi drivers, they may charge more, and for some other taxi drivers, they can maintain the same fare level. And then we'll be able to catch up with our comparable cities in the world. We may have to issue more taxi driver licenses. Currently, the government has been quite conservative. Is the government unwilling to issue more licenses because it wants to protect the interest of just a small group of people? We can think about imposing a 2-tier system. Then, the current license holders, they can charge more. And for other types of license holders, they can charge cheaper fares. This will protect the value of the licenses. It's not just by passing the 2 bills proposed by the government that we can tackle the issues with the trade. I'm quite pessimistic. I think the government should mull over this. It should think about the development of the transport industry in Hong Kong. It has to do with online ride-hailing services. It has to do with whether there is new blood joining the trade. The government will have to do a comprehensive planning. We are discussing this bill to show that we are trying to tackle the problem. The government has a greater mission. It has to have a holistic plan on the composition and structure of the public transport industry. Otherwise, we won't be able to tackle the problem at root. To end my speech, I'd like to talk about this. Well, Mr. Stephen Ho mentioned about Xiaohongshu. Some people from the mainland told us that they are discriminated against by taxi drivers here. And I explained to them that taxi drivers are not discriminating against you, but against everyone. This is not funny, but ironic. We have to pass this bill today, because it's better to have a legislation in place than not. We need regulations, we need rules, and as long as you don't break the rules, you don't have to worry about it. The key is law enforcement. And the government will have to think about the long-term development of the taxi trade. I so submit. Thank you.
Dr. Junius Ho. Deputy President, taxi drivers are humans as well. No one wants to break the rules unless they have no choices. Now, today we're complaining about all the ills of the taxi trade as if taxi drivers are the only culprits that have to take all this blame. It is not fair. We have these problems because of some underlying causes. Now, if I can, of course, I want to make more money. In a month, I have to work hard for 27 days. Sometimes I even need to do 2 shifts. I don't get any days off. This is almost inhuman. Now, when I was studying in the UK, I heard about similar stories. Maybe for those of taxi drivers, they only get 2 or 3 days off in a year when it's Chinese New Year, or because they have to attend funerals of their family members, or it's because they are dead themselves, then they get to take to rest. So we need to be understanding towards taxi drivers. Now, every time I take a taxi drivers are nice to me. It's not because they know who I am. Because I am a little more generous, even if they, put on a cover plate to say they're out of service at once. As soon as they, roll down the window, I'll say, I'll give you $100 extra. And then the problem is solved. Now, when you give peanuts, you get monkeys. Why are there so many monkeys in the taxi trade? Yeah, you want them to do a nice flip over. You want them to be the ambassador of Hong Kong's image. But then at the same time, you want them to put on monkey play. And then you complain why they're performing so poorly. So make me lose face. But then how much are you paying them? 1 kilometer, $27. And it's just over $1 each for subsequent kilometers. And now we don't even carry coins like that. Nobody would carry coins. And then we pay them peanuts. And then we want them so much back from them. So this is so distorted, this sort of mindset. After you colleagues speak up for the workers, for the taxi drivers. Now for this bill, first we have to look at the philosophy behind the bill. Now, as Mr. Michael Lee pointed out, there are just a handful of black sheep. We must not allow them to drag down the entire trade. Of course, now the problem is there are no more black sheep. It's like you have red excrement in congee, the whole congee sport. So we're not seeing more such problems. And then my father taught me, for children, you don't just scold them. You have to praise them. Because the more you scold children, the naughtier they become. If you praise them, children will think, whoa, I'm taken seriously. And there are people who appreciate what I do. And then they want to do even better. So what do we have to do here? Now, for our dear taxi drivers, they play an important role in the transport system. But then their role is diminishing, and now we are seeing a distorted scenario. The patronage was 1 million, now it's just 800,000. Why? Because actually we want to make the pie bigger, but now the pie is shrinking. And we don't want them to increase fares. And you want them to wear tuxedos. You want them to drive luxury cars to take you to the wet market. Maybe this is a distortion of our mindset. We need a combination of measures. The Transport and Logistics Bureau has introduced this bill. It's like concocting Chinese medicine while Professor Chen's not here. With Chinese medicine, you don't just have one herb. There may be over a dozen herbs or even 24 herbs. And one herb may be a bit toxic. The other is cold in nature. And this other herb may be good for your headache, but then it may cause you to bleed, to have a nose bleed. So you need something else to balance it. That's the case of Chinese medicine concoction. And with the offense points now. Yesterday we have this other bill on enhanced point-to-point transport services. That means people can to offer, say, $500. I want to go from one end of the street to the other end. Of course, there will be many taxis taking up your fare. But of course, that's not proportionate. Now, I think here we need to consider the dignity of taxi drivers. If we trample their dignity, we don't expect taxi drivers to give you respect in return. You respect me and I'll respect you even more. That's our culture. If you belittle me, I'll belittle you. It's a vicious circle. It's something so straightforward. Don't you even get that? We need to know that, and when formulating policies, we need to be caring to them. And the second point is about the working condition. You look at the taxis, they're old, they smell, they are in a poor condition. You will want to cover your nose just sitting in this taxi for 5 minutes, and then the taxi driver has to stay in the taxi for over 8 hours. Maybe they get used to it, so they no longer detect the odor. So what do we have to do? We must require all the taxi owners, all around the world, in advanced countries I'm talking about, they don't allow taxi to be older than 5 years. Do we have such restrictions? We've seen taxis that are 10 years old. So you're not doing anything about that. Who are you trying to protect? Why aren't you doing it? You want to protect the taxi companies? For new cars, they now charge $500 a shift. $500 a shift, free shifts, $1,500 a free 30 days, $45,000 1 year, $540,000 in 5 years. They get $2.7 million in rental income. Did you do the calculation? How much is a vehicle worth? Electric car, just a few $100,000. You can just waive the first registration tax. I take a taxi on the mainland, $200,000, you get a very good BYD car. And then the taxi fare is so low, and the taxi drivers are happy. Why don't we empathize with taxi drivers? Take a taxi and experience it for yourself. Don't just keep complaining about taxi drivers. It gets us nowhere. 3 years later, maybe you just double the penalty. It's still, the problem remains unresolved. Now, I support the bill, but we can't just rely on this as the only solution. We need a combination of measures. We need to respect taxi drivers. We need to respect their dignity. We have to improve the working condition of taxi drivers as the vehicle. And then there's so many restricted zones in Hong Kong. We have so many visitors. They will know what the double yellow line or triple yellow line means. They don't know what double yellow line means. That as long as they see a taxi, they will open the door, and then taxi drivers get fined. It's not right. So there should be few restricted areas for taxis because if a visitor opens the door and then the taxi driver will say, "Don't into my car," because they can't speak English. They want to say, "Don't get on my taxi," but they can't say that, so they just "Don't into my car." So what do you mean, "Don't into my car"? The visitor is already in the car. And if the visitor gets off immediately, the taxi driver should not be fined. So you need to change the regulations for taxis, so that there will be the right working condition for taxi drivers, and they need to be shown respect. And then we'll give them applause. Now we don't give them applause. Now you're just passing the buck to someone else, and that's all I want to say. Thank you, Miss Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Deputy President. I've come across good taxi drivers. I forgot to bring my purse, and the taxi driver just didn't charge me. And I've heard some residents tell me that in an emergency, taxi drivers are more than prepared to provide emergency services. So there are taxi drivers with very good attitude. Yes, we know they are black sheep in the taxi trade, but we must not generalize. There are very good taxi drivers. Of course, there are bad taxi drivers too. I think the government's introducing this bill really just to target the black sheep, to target taxi drivers with serious malpractices. Now, on the taxi issue, especially for the taxis with malpractices, I've checked past information. I found that on the 5th of December 2012, I put in an oral question. There were, at the time, there was a serious problem with refusal of hire, taxi drivers cherry picking on passengers. So I asked an oral question at the time. There were about 18,000 taxis and 57,000 taxi drivers. The complaint figure each year was about 8,000. So don't you think the figure is similar to that we have now? At the time, I actually mounted decoy operation on my own. I went with reporters to the Canton Road. I pretended I was a visitor. I spoke in Putonghua. I carried many shopping bags waiting at the street. A taxi stopped. Now, the taxi actually has a cover plate on his taximeter. And he asked in Putonghua where I was going. I said I wanted to go to Hong Ham. And he said, "I will charge you $150 taking me from Canton Road to Hong Ham." I got on the taxi. I still pretended to be a visitor, and that's what the taxi driver charged me. So I came across several taxi drivers overcharging me for different amount, but it was all overcharging. They did not charge by the taxi meter. After that decoy operation, I came back to this council, and members said, "Well, Iki, how come you do something so dangerous? If someone knew you were a legislator and you mounted a decoy operation, you will be doomed." When was it? It was 2012, and now we're in 2023. Secretary, now you are introducing the offence point system. Yes, I support it. But for the offences covered, overcharging, willfully refusing a hire, cherry picking on passengers, or not taking the most direct route, and so on. Well, these problems have been around for way longer than 10 years. Has there been any progress? Honestly, I don't see any. I can see that taxi drivers just try to make a living. It's tough for them, and they work long hours. And recently, we saw a young taxi driver, aged only 31. He drove 2 shifts a day, and he just dropped dead. And this is a tragedy. We don't want to see that. But then, at the same time, we need to address those problems. Now, the offence point system may serve some deterrent effect because it's to target the black sheep in the trade. As for good and law-abiding taxi drivers, it shouldn't affect them at all. But then, some taxi drivers told me, if there is the offence point system, first of all, They think it deals a blow to their morale. And it's also further stigmatization of taxi drivers, that is all taxi drivers are bad. And so that's why there's a law targeting them specifically. So they feel that their dignity is undermined. And already there is offense point system for general drivers. So is it a double penalty? Because they get offense points twice, so it's double penalty for them. And I explained to them it's not actually double penalty, because if you did not commit such acts, you don't overcharge your passengers and so on. The offense point system actually does not affect you. But still, I could see why they respond and why they feel aggrieved. They're just not happy about it. Now, Mr. Ben Chen said, apart from giving the stick is the carrot, we need to give them reward system as well. So good drivers are rewarded and they'll be happier in their job. And then some members pointed out it's not just about the taxi drivers. The hardware is a problem too. Taxis are so old and in such poor condition, and there's always this odor in the taxi. So the work condition of taxi drivers is poor. And there's also one reason why passengers are not happy. So it's not just about taxi drivers improving their attitude. I think the taxi trade is now in a vicious circle. The condition is poor, there's not enough patronage, it's hard to make a living, of course, then there will be fewer people joining the trade, and also income keeps falling. And some may have no choice but to break the law to earn a high income. So it's a vicious circle. Now, I support this bill. It's better to have something than nothing. But it really would not address the problem of service quality of the taxi trade. As we talk about the overall quality of taxi service and the system as a whole, there's a need for major reforms. And so for this offense point system, the good thing about it is that offense points are not accrued one-off, so you can no longer work as a taxi driver. If you accrue offense points from 8 to 15, there will be an alert, and if you have got 10 offense points, you can take an improvement course. It's only if there are 15 offense points that you'll be disqualified from driving a taxi for a certain period of time. I believe that will certainly serve a deterrent effect, and by driver has 10 offense points, they will dare not commit malpractices further. But then for the content of the taxi service improvement course, is it really the case that after taking a course there will be changes to the behavior of a taxi driver? Or is it just, going through the motion? So I'm concerned about that. Now, some members have expressed concern about law enforcement. We need to give thought to that. So how do we actually enforce law? I've received many complaints. There's a dash cam in taxis, but it's not directed at the street but at the passenger, so there's no protection for passengers' privacy. And there are in fact platforms online that share recordings inside taxis. Some is live broadcast, others are edited recordings put up on these platforms. Now, in Macau, they resort to technology. There is a cloud-based camera that's linked, of course, to the government's cloud-based storage. And it's a central system, and all the recordings are kept there. And when there's need for law enforcement, there's no need to dispute the evidence. But then after the government's mandatory camera is installed, then taxi drivers should not be allowed to install their own cameras. Because now taxi drivers have the excuse of setting up cameras because they want to protect themselves. But if there is a government cameras, then it will offer better protection to passengers' privacy. In Macau, we see that the central cloud-based camera system has worked very well. That led to a significant drop in cases of malpractices. So the government should really consider this. Now, we have privacy legislation. It's stated clearly that as long as you inform passengers there is a camera recording the what's happening inside taxi, then it's good enough. So I speak in support of the bill.
Dr. Kennedy Wong. President, I'm a lawyer by profession. So I find the spirit of the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill all right. The spirit is that any road user who commits an offense will be subject to certain penalty, and that means points will be incurred for taxi drivers in this case. I've been following the development of the taxi industry. I've also listened to members' views, and I can't help but express my grave concerns. The taxi driver is supposed, taxis are supposed to be our name card, our business card. Now, a while ago, at the Hong Kong cruise terminal, when the cruise ship arrived, many passengers were stuck at the terminal waiting for taxis. The government tried to step in, but there was not any incentive for taxis to go there and pick up passengers. The incident tarnished the image of the city. Is it true that we don't have sufficient taxis in Hong Kong? Or is it that there are so many obstacles and hardship in the industry, and there is no prospect such that younger drivers are deterred to join the trade? I'm concerned because since February this year, the arrival figures have been on the rise. We're now at about 70% of the pre-pandemic level. Hong Kong is supposed to be the international tourist hub. We are an international city, and the development of the taxi industry is essential. I have reservations about the government's regulatory approach towards the taxi industry. I don't know if this will help improve the trade at all. Now, I don't often ride in taxis. I just know that we have taxis of different colors, red, green, and light blue. For urban taxis, it's red in color. And for green taxis, they ply in the new territories. And the Lantau taxis, they're light blue in color. They operate in their respective boundaries. Would there be any change in the future? Secretary, a few days ago, there was a discussion on a quota-free arrangement for Hong Kong vehicles to use Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge and travel northwards to the mainland. And of course, the Chinese Import and Export and Manufacturers Association support that. Now, is it a feasible arrangement? If that is the case, then if you impose harsh punishments whilst not providing room for the industry's development, then taxi drivers really have a hard time. I recently read a survey. Many taxi drivers are older than me. They are in their 60s. So if the prevailing age of the taxi drivers are such, I wonder Well, I wonder whether it is possible for them to lead a dignified life. Now, my driver used to be a taxi driver. He told me that he'd rather be a chauffeur. He sold the taxi driver sold his taxi long ago. He find this job more comfortable. And he told me that the pay is on the rise. Now, in fact, 2 members currently sitting in this council have told me that despite paying $28,000 to $32,000, they are unable to hire a chauffeur. And that's from a very senior lawmaker. He is hiring a chauffeur and he's offering a pay of $28,000 to $35,000. And still, the position is left vacant. Has the government considered the work arrangements of taxi drivers, including working hours and their pay? There is limited prospects for young drivers to join the taxi trade. Some taxi drivers would rather become unscrupulous. They may misbehave by picking up other passengers without the original passenger's consent. They may impose a surcharge during inclement weather. Can we tackle these problems through this bill? I hope that the Secretary could conduct a comprehensive review on the government policies related to the taxi industry. Perhaps the scope of the taxi services can be expanded for them to cover some parts across the boundary. Say in the closed area near Huanggang, perhaps one can ride a taxi home directly. This can help expand the market for the taxi trade. Ms. Yun Xiong, President. We are discussing the Taxi-Driver-Offence Points Bill. I like to give my support. I think the bill is based on the numerous complaints made by passengers and the difficulties in effectively addressing these complaints. This can help target the black sheep in the trade and prevent them from repeated offenses. The TDOP system is similar to the driver offense point system for general motorists. There are small series of offenses and 10 points will be incurred, some less serious offenses with less points incurred. And if 15 points are incurred, one is suspended from driving a taxi. Now, I am a lawyer by profession. I sometimes take up prosecution work on Fiat. I also take part in the prosecution of some traffic cases. I understand the predicament facing taxi drivers. Some innocent taxi drivers would rather just plead guilty in the court just to save time so that they can move on and make a living, despite knowing clearly that they haven't committed the offense. I wonder if by introducing the TDOP system there would be more stress put on the prosecution division. How do we protect the innocent drivers? If they are wronged, is there a chance for them to get legal assistance and receive legal advice before the case is taken to the court? Because, at the special magistrate's court, taxi drivers are not eligible for duty lawyer service. And not many taxi drivers would fork out $8,000, $10,000 to engage a legal representative to avoid a fine of $2,500. Taxi drivers have much longer driving hours as professional drivers than other motorists who may be taking their children to school or driving to work, etc. We need to take a targeted approach against the misbehaving drivers. Like the cases we heard in Xiaohongshu, there is a syndicate targeting popular tourist attractions. So targeted law enforcement action should be taken at these tourist spots as well. I think the government should consider taking a targeted approach instead of using a broad brush, because this would affect other law-abiding ordinary drivers. There must be ways to ensure that taxi drivers drive with good demeanor and attitude and abide by the law. Some may say that I am a law-abiding driver, I shouldn't be affected. But under the proposed system, some other offenses will be targeted, such as taking up passengers with other than the hirer without their consent, and driving to a destination other than by the most direct practicable route. Now, there may be disputes over what constitutes a detour, and if there is a complaint, the case may eventually be taken to court. So the driver may pick up 20, 30 passengers a day. That means they are very likely they may appear before the court for these complaints, not to mention other traffic breaches. But I don't see anything being done about that. This is just a start, as I understand. After introducing the TDOP system, at the traffic courts, so to speak, is it possible to provide more support to drivers or taxi drivers in particular? Because they are under a lot of pressure. They only work for peanuts. If they are required to take up this extra pressure of appearing before the court as well, it's too much for them. On the issue of evidence, there are suggestions for logging devices to be installed in taxi compartments to ensure the interest of, to safeguard the interests of passengers as well as drivers. This is a significant investment. Is it possible for the government to provide incentive or support for the business sector to help with the installation of these devices in taxis? Well, if there is evidence available coming from these devices, it will be better. It will be easier for the court to decide on a case. Their respective liabilities can be easily determined. I hope there can be a collaboration between the government and the business sector. More support can be given to taxi associations to apply technology more extensively. I think this will form a major driver of going after the black sheep. Now, the third point is about law enforcement. That is, at the black spots, can the police step up law enforcement? I asked some of the taxi drivers. The tourists don't often hail a cab along Canton Road because they are now very vigilant against the so-called unscrupulous taxis. They'd rather use app-based hailing services. We need to improve our services. In places like Japan, at the taxi stand, they provide a schedule of fares prominently displayed at the taxi stand. If you go from this place to Causeway Bay, it will cost you so and so. That way, we can deter unscrupulous taxi drivers from fleecing tourists and the ignorant. For refusing to accept a hire, this is also a thorny issue. We have urban taxis and new territories taxis. At the same time, we want to encourage online car hailing service. And that comes to another point, the taxi fleet regime. Now, if I make a prearranged journey, I can choose which tunnel to go through, which route to take. The government should provide more support to the practitioners. Give them more flexibility. Should we be allowed to choose which tunnel to go to, or whether the taxi wants to cross a harbor or not? Should there be a separate category for taxis traveling to the Greater Bay Area? We need to be forward-looking. We need to improve the situation. With the introduction of TDOP, we want to help the taxi trade. We want to help the tourism industry in Hong Kong as well. We want to make our brand better. I hope that my suggestions would help improve the overall situation. In particular, I hope that there'll be more legal assistance given to the taxi drivers who appear before courts.
Mr. Kwok Wai-Keung. Thank you, Deputy President. I appreciate the speech made by Mr. Stephen Ho. Some members have shown their empathy to the trade. They talked about the reasons behind the poor taxi service quality. Dr. Junius Ho said he supports the point system, but he also expressed the views on behalf of members of the taxi trade. On the face of it, it looks like it is the tension between passengers and taxi drivers. However, we should not overlook the challenges faced by taxi drivers. There are various reasons that deter taxi drivers from providing good service. I'm a passenger myself. I can speak from the user's perspectives. I think that there is a drop of taxi service quality. There was a switch to petroleum taxis back then. And that expanded the restriction of age of taxis. There are about 18,000 taxis in Hong Kong. 5,000 of them are 13 years old or above. So we see that taxis are getting old and dilapidated. Taxi owners are responsible for the quality of taxis. And we have to look at the model of the trade. It's 24/7 service, and taxi drivers have to work for 2 shifts. I have tried to do a research and compare the situation or the prices of taxi fares in Hong Kong and around the world. For the one ranked the first is Zurich. For the first 3 kilometers is about $25, about 200 Hong Kong dollars. In 2017, in Hong Kong is ranked the 50th. And for the first 3 kilometers, the taxi fare is about $48. The taxi fare was raised, but so was it in other countries. The relevant government departments can do a research about taxi fares around the world. Taxi drivers, if they get a summons, they have to pay the fines out of their own pocket. If there are accidents, they have to pay for the compensation as well. If taxi drivers get injured, they do not get any protection. We understand that taxi drivers have been eating their meals inside the taxis and they have very little time for toilet breaks. Each shift is about 12 hours for taxi drivers. For each shift, taxi drivers work actually for about 5 to 6 hours. It's not because they want to work less, it's because they want to know how to minimize the loss. If you cross the harbor 5 times, then it costs about 5 hours. Then they may lose their income because the rent is about $500 a day, not including the cost of fuel. So how much room is there for taxi drivers to actually make money? The key is whether the point system would help. Some members said yes. Well, but from my perspective, I don't think it's actually helpful. If you look at the figures last year, there were 2,000 complaints about taxi drivers, and 40% of it concerned taxi drivers refusing to pick up passengers. Well, before the council meeting, we had a discussion about this gesture. We usually make this gesture when we hail taxis in Hong Kong. This is not the case in other countries. There was a case in which taxi drivers charged passengers a few $100s for traveling from Tsim Sha Tsui to Causeway Bay. Well, how come it costs so much to cross the harbor for taxi drivers? On refusing to hire, I want to say a few more words here. For taxi drivers overcharging passengers, you should penalize them right away. However, it's quite easy for taxi drivers to commit the offenses listed under the point system. As long as taxi drivers put up the sign of out of service, then they don't have to pick up passengers. The taxi driver may, in this case, stop if they see a passenger trying to hail a taxi. Well, does that constitute refusing to hire? There is a question about this. I tried to hail a taxi and asked the driver to cross the harbor, and I got refused. We see high saturation rate of all tunnels in Hong Kong. During peak hours, we reach 100% usage of all tunnels in Hong Kong. Well, passengers who choose to hail taxis on the street, they're usually very desperate. Say a taxi driver brings you across the harbor and he's not familiar with the roads across the harbor, it would be hard for him to pick up a passenger on the other side of the harbor. He could choose to wait at the taxi stand. And how long would the taxi driver have to wait? Each shift is about just 10 hours or so. And the taxi driver also have to wait for a gas filling. And the taxi driver will also have to clean the taxi and also have meals. How much time can a taxi driver actually work for each shift? It's hard for you to ask a taxi driver to cross the harbor unless you make a booking. I hope the government can make use of technology to solve some of the issues. Well, at the end of the day, taxi drivers are all trying to make a living. If a taxi driver takes you across the harbor, he would have to bear the opportunity cost. He makes calculation this way. That's why he may cherry-pick passengers. Passengers may not be happy with it. Well, the truth is that the entire trade is not performing well. They get competition from white licensed vehicles. The taxi fares is not high. They have to represent Hong Kong and they have to treat the tourists well. Well, it's not very fair to them. So the taxi trade is hard to sustain businesses. We cannot stop the government from implementing measures to manage the trade. However, there is a lack of measures from the government to support taxi drivers. Whether the bill is passed or not, what is most important is the government should make a step to support the trade and attract more new blood to join the industry. Then we can talk about improving the taxi service quality. Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I now call upon the Secretary for Transport and Logistics to reply, and the debate will come to a close. Secretary. President, I thank again the Chairman of the Bills Committee, Mr. Chan Kin-po, and other members, as well as the Secretariat of this Council for their efforts and support, which have made it possible for us to resume the second reading debate on this bill today. I'd also like to thank all 24 members who have spoken on this bill and the majority of members for their support. The quality of taxi service has drawn much attention in recent years. Between 2020 and 2022, the Transport Complaints Unit under the Transport Advisory Committee received several thousand complaints about taxi service each year. This shows that there is still much room for improvement of taxi service quality. Taking into account the public's strong demand for enhanced taxi service quality, we consider that apart from measures such as introducing a new taxi fleet regime, effective measures should also be implemented to strengthen the deterrent effect against malpractices of taxi drivers so as to combat black sheep in the trade and enhance the overall image of the taxi industry. On July 12 this year, the government introduced the bill to this council proposing to introduce a Taxi-Driver-Offence Points System, or the TDOP system, to cover 11 taxi driver-related offences with reference to the existing driving offence point system. Under the TDOP system, only the four most serious offences, namely defacing, damaging, or altering a taxi meter, overcharging, and 2 offences relating to refusal to accept a hire, will be assigned 10 points. These offences involve an obvious mens rea and fraudulent behavior. They will result in passengers having to pay higher than normal fares or directly affect the availability of point-to-point service provided by taxis. Therefore, we consider it necessary to assign more points for these offences to enhance the deterrent effect. Other relatively minor offences will only be assigned 5 or 3 points, so as to allow room for taxi drivers to rectify their behavior. In setting the penalty points, we took on board views of the trade and considered the strong wish of the public to combat the malpractices of individual taxi drivers. The design of the proposed TDOP system is similar to that of the driving offence point system. Under the proposed system, accumulation of offence points up to certain thresholds will trigger corresponding actions or penalties. Specifically, The Commissioner for Transport will serve an advice of TDOP on a person who has incurred 8 to 14 offense points within any 2-year period. If a person has incurred 10 offense points or more within 2 years, the Commissioner will require the person to attend and complete within a specified period a taxi service improvement course at his own cost. And the person who incurs 15 offense points or more within 2 years will be disqualified from driving a taxi for a period of time. We believe such a system will send timely alert to drivers to prompt them to watch their service attitude and behavior, help them make improvements, and at the same time enhance the overall deterrent effect, particularly against repeated offenders of various taxi service-related offenses. During the scrutiny of the bill by the Bills Committee, members generally recognized the need to impose severe penalties on the black sheep of the taxi trade and enhance the deterrent effect on repeat offenders with a view to upgrading the overall quality of taxi service and the image of the trade. However, some members were concerned whether the TDOP system would cause taxi drivers breach the law inadvertently or be easily disqualified from driving taxis. I wish to point out that the 11 offenses covered by the TDOP system are all offenses under the existing legislation and do not involve new offenses. In terms of law enforcement, prosecutors will decide whether or not to institute prosecution, taking into account the evidence available, the applicable law, and the prosecution code. Taxi drivers will not incur points simply because they have been complained by passengers. They will only incur points after the police have carried out investigation and collected evidence, and they have been convicted by the court. As such, we don't think members need to worry about law-abiding drivers breaking the law inadvertently. I wish to emphasize that the TDOP system is intended to penalize the black sheep in the trade and will have no impact on the majority good and law-abiding taxi drivers. The black sheep in the trade have seriously affected the reputation and image of the taxi industry. If we do not combat the black sheep, it would be unfair to the law-abiding taxi drivers. After the passage of the bill, the TDOP system will come into effect 9 months later to allow sufficient time for the Transport Department and the taxi trade to prepare for the new system. The TD will brief the trade on the legislation so that the trade can have a grasp on how the system operates. President, some members mentioned about issues they have with the point system. I'll make a brief response here. Both yesterday and today, some members suggested that the government should mandate all taxi drivers or owners to install camera system inside taxis to prevent disputes between passengers and taxi drivers. And when there are incidents, taxi drivers can make a video or audio recording as an evidence. As I mentioned in the other bill related to taxi trade, the government has been making use of technology to ensure service quality. We ask taxi license holders to install recording system inside taxis under the fleet regime. As to whether we should make it mandatory for all taxis to have a recording system installed, we will, after the passage of the bill, think about the feasibility of the proposal, and next year we will consult the taxi trade so that we can forge a consensus and consider whether it is mandatory to implement such measures. Some members wondered whether this point system will constitute a double penalty for taxi drivers. Well, this point system and a two-tier penalty system target different situations. The two-tier penalty system targets repeated commission of the same offense by an offender, while this proposed point system targets repeated commission of different offenses by an offender within a 2-year period. The two measures are complementary to each other and can enhance the overall deterrent effect. Also, this proposed point system does not only focus on penalizing offending drivers, but also aims to send timely reminders to offenders. And we want to educate the taxi drivers, and we will, under the point system, serve and advise on drivers and encourage them to attend taxi service improvement courses. Some members raised issues about taxi drivers making detours. Members expressed concern about the definition of making detours. I want to stress that this is an offense under the existing legislation. It is not a new offense. The original text of the relevant provision reads that a taxi driver who without reasonable excuse fails to take the most direct and practicable route to the destination at the time when he accepts a hire, that would be an offense. Say there is a traffic accident and the taxi driver chooses not to take the most direct route, then it would not be an offense. According to previous cases, a direct and practicable route may mean the shortest journey rather than the shortest, a route that takes the shortest journey time rather than the shortest distance. We think taxi drivers should communicate with passengers on the route to be taken to avoid any disputes. This will also help enhance the experience of the passengers. Some members mentioned about whether there is or are similar TTOP systems imposed by other countries or places. We understand that in other countries or places there are similar point systems relating to taxi driver related offenses, including Singapore and New York. In Singapore, there are dozens of offense provisions relating to taxi drivers' behavior, such as overcharging, refusing to hire, etc. And points are allotted for different offenses. A driver who has incurred 6 or more offense points will be suspended from driving for a period of time, and if a driver accrues 21 points or above, he will have his license revoked. Some members mentioned about whether there is room for the government to review the operation area of taxis in Lantau Island or for remote rural areas. Well, for New Territories taxis, they mainly run in New Northwest New Territories and Kowloon East. The government will review the operation area of different types of taxis, and we will keep in communication with the trade and review the transport system in new development areas as well as the infrastructure in new territories to make adjustment. Some members also mentioned about how the government will step up enforcement against illegal carriage. The government has been adopting a multi-pronged approach. We have been collecting evidence and intelligence. We conduct undercover operations, and we also conduct investigations. To enhance service quality, the police this September mounted a dedicated operation to combat malpractices of public transport, as well as illegal carriage. The police at different locations, such as the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge and the airport, etc., combat illegal carriage, as well as taxi drivers without third-party insurance. The police welcomes any reports and complaints made by the public concerning illegal carriage. With enough evidence and information, the police will conduct investigation and take enforcement actions. The police will, according to its priority, deploy resources to these actions. Members are also concerned about whether the government would regulate online ride-hailing services. The government will review existing legislations to see how we can better tackle the issues about illegal carriage and how we can regulate online ride-hailing services. And how license holders can provide services through the platforms. We target to, by mid-2024, with reference to the research we have done, communicate with members of this council. We will take into consideration the judicial review case as well as the regulation that we can impose, and we will conduct an extensive consultation in 2025 in this regard. Some members mentioned about having taxi drivers keeping a log. Currently, taxi drivers, if necessary, they can apply with the police an extract of a conviction record. They can get a record of their offense points so that taxi drivers can provide no conviction record to taxi rental companies or taxi owners, etc. Some members also mentioned about how the government can commend good taxi drivers. In order to ensure good taxi service quality, the Transport Department as well as the Committee on Taxi Service Quality rolled out a reward scheme. We will continue to explore how we can enhance this kind of reward scheme so that good taxi drivers can be commended. President, the government is determined to solve these long-standing issues relating to taxi driver offenses. We want to enhance personalized point-to-point transport services. This will enhance the taxi service quality and improve the overall image of the taxi trade. We will also step up law enforcement and explore the feasibility of installing camera system inside taxis. We'll also strive to regulate online ride-hailing services to offer support to the trade. This will have a positive impact on the public as well as to the trade. I so submit. Thank you, President.
I now put the question to you that the Taxi Driver Offence Points Bill be read the second time. Would those in favour please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Taxi Driver Offence Points Bill. This council now becomes committee of the whole council to consider the Taxi Driver Offence Points Bill.